Luckily for everybody, this isn't going to be a review of the nuts and bolts of the Irish budget, which passed almost without comment. It's pretty closely linked to the last discussion, which essentially alleged that Ireland is ruled by a comprador bourgeoisie and that its economic policy is utterly dictated by transnational companies, by the US and Europe, and that by and large, everybody knows that and goes along with it, and that the economic dependence is linked to political dependence. So essentially, over a very short period of time, Ireland has got itself integrated into uh, a war movement against Russia and has joined a thing called the Coalition of the Willing, uh, which is, it's not Ireland sort of feeling itself being bullied into a corner. It's Ireland saying, we want to be with the big boys and help launch World War III. So what has the budget got to do with this? The budget essentially has a central contradiction. And the contradiction is that it's an austerity budget. It does see a very distinct decline in the living standards of workers is factored in. But at the same time, the Office of Budgetary Responsibility and the Central Bank accuse the government of reckless expenditure. So on the one hand, they're spending way over the odds. On the other hand, they're cutting way back on what the working class are getting. Now, the government actually, to be fair to them, have a very clear explanation. They said things are going to get tough. The good old days of corporation tax just flowing in, they've gone. Trump is imposing tariffs. He's looking at American companies. He's putting the squeeze on in all sorts of directions. And not only that, but the atmosphere that Trump is creating is going to produce that that economic imbalance. So we as an Irish government are preparing in advance by investing so that we're not caught by surprise. Now, actually, that makes quite a lot of sense. But the nature of the investment makes the political direction clear. So the nature of the investment is to clear choke points. So Ireland has a lot of transnational investment. That's actually the major part of the economy. But it's probably going to slow down. So the choke points is there enough water? Are there enough apartments? Are there enough roads for these companies? Not for the population, but for the companies. And the other thing to understand about the investment strategy is that the Irish government doesn't really do any public investment. It puts aside money for investment, but it gives that money to giant companies. One good example of that is one big example of that would be the National Children's Hospital, which I think was originally budgeted at 70 billion, and I think the figure now is 500 billion. Still not completed, and there are all sorts of reports. It is actually badly built and won't meet the needs of the children. One of the key stories from there was that last year the Dáil built a bike shed, and the bike shed, I think, for about 6 bikes cost 200 200,000 grand or something like that. So something in that region, 176,000 grand. So Ireland is dependent. The policy of the government and the capitalist class is to make it more dependent. in the hope that it becomes so attractive that the money will keep flowing in. And secondly, alongside that that economic dependence is an unquestioned political dependence. So, since the start of the war in Ukraine, Ireland has massively militarized, and it's militarized in a specific way. It's militarized, uh, so it's building a sonar network to police the North Atlantic. It's placing telecommunication cables, which have nothing to do with Ireland. Ireland has no responsibility for these cables. They don't go to Ireland. But the Irish state is rushing ahead. It's also rushing ahead with a new radar system. And again, the radar system is not particularly focused on Ireland, but it will fit perfectly into a radar chain that will extend across Britain and Europe and essentially be a wall against Russia. They've doubled their military expenditure and changed the nature of the Irish military. So we now have a centralized command. And not only that, but all of what used to be called Irish military intelligence are now being shipped over to America to be trained by the CIA in torture techniques and in, round the clock surveillance. So the thing I want to point to here is, so that's the program, but the way in which the budget is designed is of some interest. The budget is designed through a process of partnership. So very early in the year, the trade union leadership meet with the government and put forward the key points that they want to address. Then about a month after that, 6 weeks, there's a general meeting, but in this meeting, the trade unions are drowned out by the bosses' organizations, by the NGOs, by the transnational themselves, by the church, and so on. So they're a minority. And everybody has something they want to ask for. But if they get a part of that, what the payment is, they are now supporting the budget. And so when the budget comes around, which it comes around in August, there's a final settlement and everyone has already signed up. So the trade unions signed up because they see that as a wonderful mechanism for doing deals. You'll get a deal out of the government. It may be a fairly minimal one, but you can sell out to the members and there's no trouble and no conflict. And the trade unions criticize parts of this current budget, but then they said there's all this investment and it's wonderful. The investments are a really good idea, but there's no investigation of what the investment is and where it's going. Sinn Féin are critical, but the fact is the Sinn Féin programme is to be part of the coalition government, and they haven't proposed a different programme to the coalition government. And in fact, in this budget, Mary Lou made a big speech, and really what she said was, you've let down a section of the workers and the workers will be disappointed. There's nothing that would represent an alternative there. So the budget is in, there's hardly any comment on it. And it's more or less been forgotten about now, but it does represent a very significant change in direction. So there are there are a couple of tests. Uh, and one of the tests is the Irish housing crisis. The housing crisis is very extreme. Uh, uh, and the government, with the support of the unions, have a housing for all policy that has been in place for about, the initial form came in 2011. Billions have been pumped in. The housing crisis keeps getting worse and worse. Now, why does it keep getting worse and worse? Because the housing crisis, uh, as I say, there's very, very little public state activity. Housing development is carried out by private developers who get subsidies from the state. And the purpose of the programme is to deliver 4% on investment. Now, obviously, if you're delivering 4% investment, there's no prospect of the price of housing ever coming down. And in fact, it doesn't come down, it keeps going up and up. And in this budget, one of the striking things is that the government give a special tax break for apartments. So, their answer to a shortage is to say, here you are, here's more money for capitalist development. And the result is people spend well over half their income on housing. People living in very, very unsatisfactory housing, rents of over €2,000, 2,500 for apartments in Dublin. And of course, a tail end of people who are homeless and on the streets or forced into a terrible accommodation. So the problem there is that this new budget, even though it devotes more money to housing, is no different from the earlier housing initiative. So nothing will happen to the housing market. The housing market will continue to be based on the need to guarantee the 4%. As one housing analyst said, in Amsterdam, you can only get 2%. That's why all the money goes to Ireland. So the other big thing which is linked is that the most obvious aspect of this housing crisis is an immense rise in racism. Big section of the population have decided that they don't have houses, they don't have public services. Well, that's because of the migrants, right? A very virulent anti-migrant movement has grown up. It's not that large, but it's very vicious. And what most people will not acknowledge is that the government has encouraged this development. So the very first major riot, and it wasn't even a major riot, but the cops stood back and let it run, was in Dublin about 2 years ago. And the cops formed a line, stood back, said they'd try and get ringleaders later. And in fact, the same thing happened 3 nights ago. There was a big attack on a migrant hostel. The cops stood back, said they would identify. We're very familiar with this in the north with the RUC. It's called Now Boys Now. And what it is the police are clearly enabling the racists, and the racists know that. Now, if we're going to fight racism in Ireland, we're going to have to put forward an alternative housing policy that relies on expropriation and on public expenditure. Although this government will never give that public expenditure. Um, and the other thing we have to do is to, build a real anti-racist movement. The current one says things like refugees are welcome here, or shouts shame on you. A real anti-racist movement would be saying unity of the working class. The reason we need to support migrants is that the working class must stand together, otherwise it's defeated. And it must stand together around a programme, and that programme is for housing for all, health for all, jobs for all. And one of the obstacles to building that movement is the Irish trade union bureaucracy. Their response to the original Dublin riot was to come out the lunchtime after, stand at the GPO and hand the whole campaign over to the government. And they have shown no signs of activity since. At this point, I have a wee bit more to say, but two more things to say. Before I go on, I'm going to fit in Catherine Connolly here. Right? And I think everyone would agree that her victory in being elected president is a tremendous slap in the teeth to the Irish state. Somebody who's anti-NATO, somebody who wants to stand with Gaza, that's the last person that the Irish government wanted in. But the presidency is a purely ceremonial office. Connolly's not going to be able to do very much. And part of the reason for the government's utter defeat was the collapse of its own candidates. Micheál Martin put this boy forward because he wanted to use the president election to argue against Irish neutrality. So that was an intent, and he imposed the candidate over the heads of his own party. But a week in, it turns out that this guy has a financial scandal connected to his landlordism, and he has to withdraw. And all that's left is a factotum from Fine Gael, and the government are incredibly unpopular. Fine Gael vote is low, and Fianna Fáil have been demoralised and splintered by their own role, won't vote for Humphreys. So at the end of the day, Humphreys, the other candidate, came in at 20%, and Catherine Connolly came in just under 70%. So it was a landslide victory. And that the way in which that will roll on is Micheál Martin is in danger. And if the row within Fianna Fáil is not crushed quickly, then there could be a tremendous focus on Ireland's role in the new year as president of the European Union. Because in this next year, Europe is moving at sort of reckless speed towards direct confrontation with Russia. And Ireland, as I've said before, is not reluctantly stand to one side. It wants to rush forward in front. And the Irish people aren't too aware of this. But if the crisis in Fianna Fáil bubbles on, that may well become an issue. So Catherine Connolly won because people liked her ideas. It's a sort of popular sentiment towards neutrality and a defence of Palestine in Ireland. So she had a good chance to start with. Then, as I said, because of the disarray within the government organisations, the parties. And then the third thing was halfway through the campaign, Sinn Féin agreed to support Connolly. And after that, uh, the addition of Sinn Féin supporters to the mix meant that Connolly was almost certain to be elected. Uh, now, uh, the thing is that there's a guy called Paul Murphy writing an International Viewpoint uh, who said, and basically his message is, this is a game changer. We're going to have a conference in the new year, and it'll be to set up the bounds of a new left party led by Sinn Féin, and we'll sweep to victory. I can assure you, none of this is going to happen. Sinn Féin supported Catherine Connolly because they didn't have the nerve to stand on their own. If they'd got a bad vote, it would have stood them. It would have made them fall back in the forthcoming elections. So they didn't want to take the chance, and Connolly gave them a victory without putting their own neck on the block. Number two, the campaign that Murphy is proposing is an electoral alliance. The things that it's bringing up are things that will be sorted out by votes in the Dáil, and votes in the Dáil that the lefties will lose. And thirdly, Sinn Féin are not going to subordinate themselves to an amalgamation of the left. And the last thing of all is parts of this loose alliance around Connolly have already announced that they will be starting their own candidates in future elections. And guess what the next election is? It's the election for Catherine Connolly's seat. And the first name for that seat is going to be Mairead Farrell of Sinn Féin. So if the lefties want a left vote, the only way they'll get one is to fall in behind Mairead Farrell, which is a very restrictive form of left unity. So I'm going to two more things to say and I'll stop talking. I want to mention the North. So the Northern economy is separate from the Southern economy, and essentially it's a small subset of the UK economy. And there's a very serious crisis coming up because the local administration say, well, with all these bills, we can't pay them. And they went over to Westminster, says, we need more money. And Westminster said, well, you're not getting any more money. We gave you a lot of money. And the problem is, from the point of view of the Westminster government, they have given them enough money because that money would be enough to run a district in England, even a poor district. But the missing components of that is that Stormont is expected to raise its own revenue, and it just refuses to do that for populist reasons. It could raise money by taxing the rich. Well, they are the rich. They're not going to do that. And there are a few other things that they could do that are perfectly obvious that they'll not want to do. They could impose water charges. That would solve a lot of their problem. It would bring in about 300 million, but it would hit their support pretty hard. Public sector pay is coming up. They could break the link with Britain and reduce public sector pay. That would hit them very hard. And what's the other thing they could do? Oh, yes, they could rationalise expenditure. And what they've already agreed to, they've agreed to this thing called the Bengoa report, which is a massive privatisation of the health service. But they've never done it, again, for populist reasons. It means closing almost all the hospitals and privatising local services. And they know that'll be unpopular. So there's a big crisis arising there. Lastly, I want to say, um, what's the alternative, right? You know, one of the big problems with the existing left is that they talk Marx, but when it comes to economics, they propose Keynes. Uh, they say, how do we reform capitalism so it'll do things better? And that day has gone. So in the north, it spreads out. Spreads out. The Sinn Féin are so deeply ensconced in the local administration that it never crosses their mind to suggest that it's a solution for anything. The solution is to get more money out of the British, and that's about it. Um, uh, in the south, as I said, uh, you're looking for direct public investment, but that means more or less an insurrection against the government. Uh, and we have to start from scratch there. We don't have a working class movement that wants to overthrow the Southern government. Uh, and the last thing, which I think is sort of fairly obvious, I've got to say it, there is a choice to be made within capitalism. There's a choice occurring, splitting down all the way through the globe. You're either, in the immediate future, you're either going to be a vassal of the US. And by a vassal, I mean do exactly what you're told and do it immediately. A good example of that is that Trump is trying to slap in sanctions on Canada for a TV advert aired by a provincial governor. So it's impossible to think of anything that you could do that wouldn't demand that the US crack the whip. Uh, Now, the other choice is the Belt and Road. Uh, and I'm not going to make any great suggestions about that. All I'm going to say is that I'm not going to say China is socialist or anything like that. I'm going to say that the Chinese are reacting against the attempt by the US to re-establish world hegemony. And in doing so, they're creating spheres of influence. And if we were in the sphere of influence of the global south, we would have a great deal more freedom than we do in the sphere of influence of the global west. Um, but nobody seems to think that. But I think the West is losing. I think that's evident. I mean, uh, the death pangs are pretty painful, uh, but that's where they are. And the big job is to start. Um, I think I might need to do a third one of these and bore everybody to tears, and that would be, um, what is the alternative? How do we get started? How do we go from, on the race question, for example, from refugees are welcome here, shame, shame, to unity of the working class and working class defence organisations? I'll stop there.